$805 billion. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. That is the absolute mountain of cash the United States is pouring into domestic industrial policy right now, across things like the Infrastructure Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the CHIPS Act. Just to put that massive number into perspective, compare it to China's industrial subsidies, which hit around 430 billion RMB. That's roughly $60 billion back in 2022. Okay, let's dive into this because we're literally watching state intervention make a comeback on a scale that is completely unprecedented in the modern era.
Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to track exactly what happens when governments drop these trillion-dollar sums into their own economies. Because, in a world that is this deeply interconnected, domestic subsidies, they never actually stay domestic. They send out these massive shockwaves, ripples that wash across the entire global economy, totally scrambling prices, redrawing trade routes, and forcing competitors to either adapt or just fall behind.
So here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the industrial policy boom, do a quick reality check on the actual impact, and then trace that global ripple effect. After that, we'll look at a wild case study on shipbuilding, check out the intense semiconductor subsidy race, and finally, ask the big question: compete or cooperate?
All right, part one, the industrial policy boom and this entirely new era of state intervention.
Government intervention is definitively back, but the why has totally changed. Back in the day, this was mostly about basic economic upgrading or maybe protecting some infant industries. But today, it's a whole different ballgame. The real drivers now are climate mitigation, strategic competitiveness, supply chain resilience, and national security. Governments are laser-focusing on highly specific sectors like low-carbon tech, semiconductors, and critical minerals. We aren't just trying to build factories anymore. We are literally trying to secure the green energy transition and national defense all at the exact same time. But how exactly are they pulling this off? Well, honestly, it depends entirely on how deep a country's pockets are. Advanced economies rely heavily on direct financial grants and state aid. They have the fiscal space to just, hand over cash. Emerging markets and developing economies, though, they don't really have that luxury. Their toolkit leans way more into import tariffs, state loans, and tax relief. Because of their tighter budgets and administrative limits, they kind of have to rely on trade restrictions to get the job done.
Moving on to part two, reality check on impact. Counting policies versus counting dollars.
Right, so we really need to talk about this huge perception gap. Just counting the sheer number of policy announcements a country makes, that actually tells us almost nothing about the real economic disruption. Take France back in 2019, for example. They had 79 reported interventions. Sounds like a lot, right? But the actual economic impact was a tiny 140 million euro grant element. It's basically a rounding error. Now, flip over to the US post-2021. Maybe fewer flashy press releases, but the actual economic impact is a colossal $805 billion. The takeaway here is crucial. You've got to follow the dollars, not the PR announcements.
Which brings us to part three, the global ripple effect and navigating the supply chain spiderweb.
To really grasp how these billions behave out in the wild, we have to look at the structure of modern manufacturing. We live in the era of global value chains, or GVCs. Basically, these are incredibly fragmented cross-border production networks linking firms, suppliers, and buyers all over the planet. And get this, trade in intermediate goods, like the parts and components, makes up more than half of all world trade. So think of the global economy like this giant, intricate spiderweb. If a government plucks just one string way up top, those vibrations travel across the entire web, crossing borders and oceans. When you map out demand in these chains, you see this incredibly dense hierarchical structure where inputs flow straight from upstream suppliers down to downstream users. So, what happens when a government throws massive subsidies at a huge upstream sector like steel or basic chemicals? Well, the effects cascade forcefully down the entire chain. It slashes input costs, juices productivity, and ultimately triggers a massive export surge for every single industry downstream. It's a total domino effect.
Let's look at exactly how this plays out in part four, case study, shipbuilding, floating on subsidies.
Let's check out a real-world test case for this. Between 2006 and 2013, China made this absolutely massive $91 billion push to dominate global shipbuilding. And hey, on paper, it worked. They expanded their global market share by a staggering 42%. But here's the wild punchline. Only 30% of that gain was actual real global growth. The rest was literally just crowding out their rivals in Japan and South Korea. And the financial side? A catastrophic net return of negative 82%. Every single dollar of subsidy generated just 18 cents in domestic profits.
Basically, they threw piles of cash at entry subsidies, paying super inefficient producers to just open shipyards to grab that free money.
But you've got to see how this failure actually rippled into a really weird success. Step 1, those entry subsidies created a flood of brand new, totally inefficient shipyards. Step 2, this sparked massive excess global capacity. Step 3, because there were suddenly way too many ships, global ship prices just crashed by 9 to 17%. But then comes the twist in Step 4. Cheaper ships meant much cheaper freight rates worldwide. And that drop in shipping costs actually boosted China's broader macroeconomic trade volume by 5%. That's like $144 billion annually in wider trade. So yeah, the shipbuilding sector itself hemorrhaged money. But that subsidy ripple effect accidentally acted as a massive stimulus package for global traders and consumers. Crazy, right?
All right, on to part 5, the semiconductor subsidy race, silicon stakes. We're moving from massive cargo ships down to the microchip. This is arguably the most fiercely contested sector on the planet right now, where industrial subsidies and national security are colliding head-on. And it's fascinating to see how the biggest players are reacting. You've got this huge divergence. On one side, take TSMC out of Chinese Taipei. They are running a global expansion playbook. They're keeping their ultra-high-end fabrication plants at home, but they're selectively expanding into the US to scoop up those huge CHIPS Act subsidies we talked about earlier. On the other side, you've got SMIC from China. Staring down strict international export controls, they are forced to look completely inward. They're pouring capital into domestic tooling and legacy integration just to build up self-reliance. Government policy is completely dictating corporate strategy here.
But here is the best-kept secret about semiconductor subsidies. They actually don't stay at home. The research shows that incorporating cross-border effects nearly doubles the learning rate, revealing massive international spillovers. What that means is when the US or Europe subsidizes chip manufacturing, it ends up accelerating innovation for the whole world. Subsidies in one single jurisdiction actually reduce costs and spur innovation abroad, simply because the knowledge and the supply chains are so incredibly intertwined. You literally cannot build a wall around silicon innovation.
That brings us to our final section, Part 6. Compete or cooperate? The ultimate takeaway.
So this leads us to the ultimate question. What actually happens to the global economy when everyone acts alone versus when they team up? The data gives us a pretty clear answer. If you simulate a scenario where just one single country unilaterally introduces a 10% output subsidy in their manufacturing sector, you mostly see these downward trends. When one country acts entirely alone to subsidize, they usually end up with small welfare losses. Why? Because the fiscal costs of funding that subsidy are just absolutely astronomical, and it ends up dragging down their own terms of trade. Going it alone is just insanely expensive.
Now contrast that isolated go-it-alone approach with deep cooperation. When you look at the projections for mutually aligning industrial subsidies on a global scale, the difference is night and day. Deep cooperation produces these massive, transformative welfare gains. It takes a fragmented, inefficient system and turns it into an engine for coordinated global growth. The data makes it crystal clear. Coordinating industrial policy works infinitely better than everyone just doing their own isolated national interventions.
Which leaves us with this final thought for today's explainer. The trillions of dollars, they're already being spent. The global supply chains are already shifting. But as these ripple effects continue to wash over the global economy, we really have to ask ourselves, are we entering a new era of deep, coordinated cooperation that's going to lift global wealth? Or are we locking ourselves into a fragmented, zero-sum subsidy race that's just going to bleed national treasuries dry? The data clearly tells us what works, but I guess only time will tell which path global leaders are actually going to choose. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.